First up this week, two men, one being a parliamentary aide, were charged with spying for China. On the same day, 4 Germans were also arrested for alleged espionage. In our cover piece this week, Nigel Inkster says this is all part of a global spying campaign for an increasingly shameless Chinese Communist Party, which has got hundreds, if not thousands, of people around the world gathering secrets. Nicholas Eftimiades has spent over 30 years uncovering Chinese espionage. He joins me now. Nick, you're a specialist in Chinese espionage. What is unique or separates the way that the Chinese Communist Party operates compared to other countries?
Well, first off, the volume of the effort. I mean, there's no question that this is the largest scale series of intelligence activities we have seen in modern history. So number one is scale. Number two, and this is most important, is China takes a whole of society approach. Meaning that it's not just the Ministry of State Security or the military or the Ministry of Public Security or even the United Front Work Department within China. These are all government agencies and party organizations. But it does spread out to where Chinese law requires participation and support from Chinese state-owned enterprises and commercial entities as well. So it is on a vast scale that we've not seen in history before. And lastly, the target sets. Chinese intelligence tends to go after primarily commercial interests, dissidents abroad, covert influencing of foreign governments, and also, of course, the traditional espionage of national security secrets. Most of the Western world lives in that last category, national security secrets. But for China, it's a vast collection program that they have globally.
Nick, in his cover piece for the magazine this week, Nigel Inkster talks about Operation Fox Hunt. This is extraordinary stuff, a secret global operation in which private investigators basically hunt down Chinese officials who have fled the country, and they threaten them, saying if you come back to China and you face some jail time, we'll let your family go free or we won't bother your family. And according to Inkster's piece, a staggering 12,000 people have been found in these so-called fugitive recovery operations in 120 countries over the past 10 years. This is happening in democratic countries under officials' noses.
Yeah, it is true. It's also, remember, this is also China's definition of criminals,
right?
Which includes not only true criminals, people who absconded with fortunes coming from China, but it also includes advocates of democracy, Uyghurs, Tibetans, members of Falun Gong, people who support Taiwan independence, known as all these are known as the 5 poisons. So it's not the overseas oppression of criminals. It is overseas oppression of all who oppose the CCP.
And there are also covert police stations established in more than 50 countries, according to Inkster's piece. Again, this is happening in democracies, and they're disguised as places where the Chinese government are trying to help citizens in a different country with their paperwork, with their documentation, but really they're spying operations. How can this be going on?
Well, that's a good question. And in fact, until it was brought to light by a think tank, by a human rights organization, governments weren't moving against it at all. And China has de facto set up elements of repression overseas as quote police stations, and it's the reasoning is ridiculous. I mean, these are functions that are carried out by any consulate and any embassy abroad. So there's no reason to have a covert police station to do it. It violates international law, violates common practices done by nations. And the fact of the matter is that, it's in many cases, I know in our own case in the United States, that I've seen these things reported as early as 2010 with no action on the part of the government against them. So I think in a scale of priorities, until it became public, it wasn't considered a very high up on the law enforcement agendas globally. But now it's gotten a lot more attention, and they seem to be a little more aggressively moving. China's also got more aggressive in this regard over the past decade or decade and a half, and that has spurred a reaction amongst democracies.
And why has it got more aggressive over the past decade and a half? Is it simply the confidence to do so? What shifted?
Well, it's Xi Jinping in particular has gotten a lot more aggressive because of China's growing strength. And this was up through COVID. Actually, they're starting in about 2018 when they started pushing this wolf warrior foreign policy. They started getting aggressive. They had enough power where they could actually start threatening countries. And this was China asserting itself on the global stage simply because of its economic and military power. And, COVID hit and their behavior became worse. Largely to try and cover all the actions that happened during COVID. And nations started realizing this. Globally, views of the Chinese government and their behavior went down dramatically through COVID and since COVID. So China has been fighting to sort of get its place, what it believes its place is in a new world order, one driven by China. And it hasn't, and as of late, the past couple of years, the West has been responding. And this is the situation we find ourselves in now.
Also during COVID, you had China's huge crackdown on Hong Kong. And since then, you've had more Hong Kong Chinese refugees coming west, particularly to the UK, as there is a pathway for many of them to do so. Are they also at risk of the Chinese Communist Party trying to come after them on UK shores?
Oh, most certainly. China, and this is a behavior of China that goes back hundreds of years, that everything in Chinese intelligence, and policing services is about protecting the party. And we see that from the internal security structure out globally. And protecting the party means quelling all voices of dissent. And whether those voices be in mainland China, in Hong Kong, Taiwan, or anywhere else globally. And one can see the billions that China puts towards this, the focus of their intelligence services, in which this plays a large role. It's one of the reasons that their intelligence and security services are so large, because they make a great effort to reach out globally to quell any type of dissent and to exploit individuals that could possibly benefit the CCP.
So I guess the obvious question, Nick, is how on earth is this happening in countries like the US and the UK? And do these countries have the apparatus and the security necessary to tackle it?
Well, that's actually a very good question. And the answer to your first part of that question is that our governments, respective governments in the US, UK, and elsewhere, have been occupied by many other things, not the least of which is, as of the past couple of years, a war in the Ukraine, now the Middle East, which we had a 20-year counterinsurgency effort going towards. So there's been a lot on the plate for US and UK intelligence and security services. As to whether we are prepared for it, the answer is no. I don't think actually internally you'll find a lot of dispute with that. The US has been working aggressively to try and recruit and bring people in to be able to address China as a strategic construct. The UK as well. However, there aren't that many people, and both countries lack in expertise, lack in everything from language expertise to cultural awareness to awareness of Chinese operations and how they're done. It's a real lacking in both elements. I mean, there are a lot of what we call one book wonders, people who are just getting into the business who understand, but there's a lot of lacking in long-term experienced expertise in these areas in the intelligence and security services of both countries. So that's going to need time to build and a concerted effort on the part of both nations, as well as strategic planning. The Five Eyes need to be far better in strategic planning on how to contend with a growing China at a nation-state level.
Nick, one point that Inkster makes in his cover piece for the magazine is that this isn't exactly a new concept, one country spying on another country. So how seriously should we take the rise of the CCP's espionage?
That it's correct. One nation spying on another is not a new concept at all. However, one nation stealing and making the greatest transfer of wealth in the history of our species, that is a new concept. One nation reaching out to a diaspora overseas and oppressing it and threatening families internally using all the modern technology of the day, that also is a new concept. So China's breaking ground in many areas in its intelligence activities domestically and overseas. So it's something that we all have to contend with because we're not structured to deal with this. U.S. and the U.K. are just not, our security services are not structured to deal with this. We're very used to protecting our own secrets at a government level. That we do reasonably well. Very used to protecting our own secrets. What we're not used to is engaging deeply with industry and protecting industry secrets or helping industry to protect its secrets. You know, particularly in some cases when it's not in the interest of industry to upset China. So, you know, we have a love-hate relationship in some senses. Our industries make a lot of money off China, and we have governments that are now telling them, look, you have to consider national security, and that's going to impact your bottom line in these cases. So there's a lot of capitalism that needs to be addressed in the nature of relationships between our own security, our governments who are trying to ensure security, our industry, which is trying to make a profit, and China, which is trying to subvert the West and establish a new world order.
Nick, thanks so much for joining Spectator TV.